All right. So what we're going to do today is we're going to cover 19th century ideology of Kuyperianism, and we're also going to do some of the review for the Unit 2 exam. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with reviewing for the Unit 2 exam first. Before I get to doing that, I do want to alert you that we are going to have one more lecture before the Unit 2 exam. That lecture is going to cover our fourth set of 19th century ideologies, including Darwinism, irrationalism, and psychoanalysis. Because that's going to be a standalone lecture video, I thought that it would be best today to go ahead and offer to you a lecture video for review that you can watch a couple times over on this overarching ideas in Unit 2. So let's just hit these overarching ideas. The first one is that during this unit, we really looked at the concept of revolution. And we talked about two different kinds of revolution. The first one was the forcible overthrow of a government through mass mobilization. The two illustrations that we used for that in this course was the American Revolution and, of course, the French Revolution. The other kind of revolution is the idea of a social revolution. We tend to associate the term revolution with rapid and sometimes violent political change, but it can also describe a broad economic and social upheaval. Now, when we talk about revolution as an idea, we want to locate it within its historical context. When revolution first originally came about, it wasn't the forcible overthrow that people thought about when they thought about revolution. They thought about the scientific revolution, and they thought about the change in a geocentric world to the heliocentric world. And so when they thought about revolution, they thought about this idea of the fact that all of the planets are evolving on an axis and they're revolving, and they have a revolution or an orbit around the sun now. There's a heliocentric revolution that took place uh, during this time period. And so that is then brought into the world of forcible overthrow of governments, and then the idea is also used for social changes. Now, the major social revolution that we talked about that was all encompassing of all sorts of different social revolutions that were taking place during that time period was the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution had within it a technological revolution, a demographic revolution, an agricultural revolution, an urban revolution, a commercial revolution, a transportation revolution, and basically a financial revolution took place during the Industrial Revolution. Now, when we talk about the technological revolution, you should recall that we looked at a timeline where textile developments took place, and there were all sorts of innovations in technology that made uh, harvesting wool and separating it and turning it into cloth into a more expedient enterprise for those people that worked in the textile industry. Then we also had other developments of technology that had to do with transportation or communication. So we have the development of the steam engine, and the steam engine made transportation for steamboats and for the locomotive, making it easier to get commodities and raw resources from one location where it's harvested to the urban centers. This also created a agricultural revolution that took place too. As steam engines and also combustion engines started to get used, we needed less people to actually farm the land. And so a lot of people moved into the cities to work in factories. And so we have this large urbanization, an urban revolution that's taking place along with the agricultural revolution that's taking place. And then, of course, this leads to commercial and financial revolutions where commodities are created for people to have luxury goods. and more people, the middle class, developed, and more of these middle class folks were able to have access to luxury goods that before only the aristocracy could actually access. Now, another major idea that we talked about in Unit 2 was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is this concept of humanity progresses itself through human reason. And so, using and employing the scientific method that involves kind of an overall skepticism of the enchanted world that went before it, and a new mechanization of the world in which the world could be analyzed through the five senses. So, through empiricism, scientists started creating tests and hypotheses, and as they made more observations and they tested and experimented using their senses, they were to develop new deductions about how all of reality in the world worked. Now, this was using experience too. The Enlightenment also helped develop the individual and the individual's consciousness. Individuals becoming very aware of their own cognition, their own rationality, their own understanding of where they derived knowledge, and how their experiences informed their knowledge. One of the most important thinkers was John Locke, who came up with the concept of the tabula rasa. And the tabula rasa was this concept that every human being was born with a blank slate. They didn't have innate ideas that were given to them by God, but rather all of their experience was informed by the use of their five senses to create all of their knowledge base and all of their rationality. So this was the development of modernism, and with the Enlightenment, there were a number of major philosophers that emerged. I encourage you to go back to our original lecture on the Enlightenment and to look at some of those philosophers, because those people are significant and they're going to show back up on our lecture on the exam. You're going to see people like John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Voltaire on the exam. So be careful and attentive to look at the slides that have to do with those particular individuals. Okay, after talking about those major areas, we started talking about 19th century ideologies. And we talked about, in one lecture, three essential ideologies. Conservatism, which is represented best by the figure of Edmund Burke, a person that you're going to also want to reconsult for the purpose of the exam. Then there was also the idea of liberalism, best represented by the figure of John Stuart Mill. And then there was nationalism, which was best represented by Otto von Bismarck. Now, with each one of these, there is a particular class or major idea that is related to this ideology. The aristocracy is closely connected to conservatism. These are the royal, noble, landed, titled elites that have a inheritance that's passed on from generation to generation and large holdings of land. The characteristics of conservatism included the tradition that this aristocracy continued to pass on, and the hierarchy of the aristocracy, and the corporate relationships that were held between the aristocrats, and also the relationships they had with those that were underneath them, whether it be serfs or if it will be just the people that worked the land that the aristocrat owned. And then, of course, the idea of inherited positions of leadership was incredibly important. And the fact that those inherited positions of leadership were based on a divine right passed by God. Now, with liberalism, the major idea that's closely connected to it and the major group of people are the bourgeoisie. These are the middle class workers that emerge in modernity. These middle class people included merchants, bankers, tradesmen that were extremely successful as tradesmen, or people that had large lands and managed the lands for an aristocrat, or a miner who owned a mine and had miners working for that major mine owner. Liberalism cultivated values such as individualism, inherited rights, equality for law, economic freedom, sanctity of private property, talent, ambition, and material success. When we think about the American Revolution and some of the ideas that Thomas Paine championed for Americans, we see also in the Declaration of Independence Thomas Jefferson declaring some of these rights, the life, liberty, and the pursuit of property, or the pursuit of happiness, material success. And then the third ideology was nationalism. Nationalism's major uh, group that comes around this ideology and embodies it is the idea of the patriots, or patriotism. Characteristics of nationalism is just the strong belief in a national identity, or the strong loyalty to a nation. Uh, the ideas that bring that nation together. When I talked about the Declaration of Independence, or when you think about America as a nation, we think about the Statue of Liberty, or the Pilgrims, or we think about pledging allegiance, or ideas like "In God We Trust" on our coinage. All of these things foster and build this national identity. The nation is the only goal that's worth pursuing in the ideology of nationalism. And there's this uncompromising loyalty to the nation, even if the nation might be doing things that ethically might be controversial. There is this sense of fealty and a demand that's on the citizen who is a patriot to the national cause. Other nations are often seen as a threat to those who have a very high ideological um, gravitation towards nationalism. Two other 19th century ideologies we covered last time in lecture videos were Romanticism and then Socialism. Romanticism was kind of the fruit of the Enlightenment and a reaction to the over rationalization of the Enlightenment. In Romanticism, we have a relocation of value towards the emotions, towards the affections, and towards the appetite or the will, away from the intellect. And the idea was that all of understanding didn't just come from the intellect, but the emotions and the imagination inform our lives in so many different ways. And so there's this fostering of creativity, of spontaneity, and this desire for seeking solitude in order to reflect on the emotions that a person experiences, or the feelings that they express. And also, the solitude is usually done in the natural environs where the nature is being observed and is being analyzed not in a mechanical scientific method fashion, but in a sublime, beauteous, reflective manner in which somebody is taking in with awe all of the wonder and the beauty of creation. And then socialism was a reaction to the liberalism that was developing with the bourgeoisie. The socialism of Karl Marx is best represented by a body of people called the proletariat, who were the factory workers during the Industrial Revolution. Karl Marx firmly believed that the socialism was going to take off as a global idea, and that an egalitarian system would be created in which all people were on equal footing and on equal grounds. There would not be an aristocracy, there would not be a bourgeoisie, there would not be any sort of hierarchy whatsoever. There would be a strong solidarity among the people, and there would be cooperative effort to continue to progress humanity in a positive